Hi, I'm Jeff Jones, and I'm going to read the first 3 chapters of Dwell in Rest. It's not even a final copy yet, but it's the copy that I have to read from. So the first 3 chapters of Dwell in Rest. 1. Molly McGregor swung her feet off the side of the too-soft bed onto the wood-grain vinyl plank floor. A marshmallow mattress topper had cushioned her in sleep and in restlessness. Her 59-year-old bones were longing for more confident support than was provided by the fluffy bedding. There might be a useful metaphor in there, note to self. Her feet on the cool floor, she regarded her toes, the nails newly painted shiny red. This invigorated her, giving her an embarrassing boost. At least my nails are done. She looked at her hands still sunk in the mattress topper beside her. She snorted a rebuking laugh and let her eyes rove the room, tracing walls covered with tiny paintings next to lace curtains, bed and breakfast decor. Certainly better than dorm room chic, even in the swankiest residence hall of the suburban college hosting the Writers' Conference. The early morning in June was already sunny. Her rented room glowed warmly around a duct of golden light shafting under the shade. She could hear robins calling, doing a call and response from near and far, crows providing the backing track. These were her favorite days of the year. June mornings, not writers' conferences. She had insisted on staying off campus, a prima donna's demand in exchange for making herself available to the conference attendees. If she didn't stay away from the crowd of other writers, she would get no writing done. Ironically, or not, they were paying her to talk about writing, not actually to do writing. But she was in the early stages of a new project, a book that was not part of her popular series of cozy small-town church dramas. The venture in a new direction had driven her to desperate prayers and to the nighttime restlessness, no doubt. The secluded accommodations were also meant to give her time to pray and listen, theoretically. Shuffling to the attached bathroom, another stipulation of her contract, she paused, entranced by the numerous little paintings with maritime themes, sailing ships from generations long past, sailors in profile, puckering around a tobacco pipe or carrying a rucksack along a rustic dock. Seagulls. Lots of seagulls. From outside the walls of that tight bathroom, she could still hear the crows. Seagulls, seen or heard this far from Lake Michigan, were a rarity. A chatter of sparrows joined the robins and the crows that morning. Out of the bathroom, she discovered that, as she slept, the room had become inverted. The desk was to the right of the bed, not to the left, as she remembered. Did she have a mirror dream? Apparently, she had made a nocturnal visit to the opposite of this room. Perhaps she was just now inventing that concept, mirror dream. She would take note for later. It was turning out to be a morning of odd inspirations. Inspiration for drafting her new work carried her for the next 2 hours, from 6:30 to 8:30. She did not count the passing minutes or even the hours spent over her laptop. At the end of that time slot, an alarm on her phone reminded her of her obligations at the conference. She did count 3,000 words written, a satisfying morning production. After stowing her laptop, she showered quickly before throwing together her ensemble for the day. She arrived on campus in her hybrid SUV just after 9 a.m., another triumph of discipline and a vindication of her simple manner of dress. Simple, easy, maybe lazy. It was quick to assemble on a morning like this, and her freshly done toenails were on display in comfortable sandals, so there was that. "Hi, Mrs. McGregor." A young man who worked for the conference greeted her at the end of a small parking lot where she had been told she could leave her car. She shifted her bag up her shoulder, bunching her blouse and sweater in the process. "Molly, please. Mrs. McGregor is my mother-in-law." She was not above the occasional cliche, but that one prompted her to wonder when last she had spoken with her ex-mother-in-law. "Oh, okay, sure." The kid extended one thin arm as if directing her to the lifeboat on a sinking ship. Was she late? 9:30 was what she had understood. He seemed to read her thoughts. The other speakers all met for breakfast. Iris set that up. Maybe she didn't tell you. It was last minute. Clearly, Iris had understood Molly's intentions. The communal breakfast was exactly the sort of spontaneous socializing she had sought to avoid by staying off campus. Another victory, and the day was still young, barely a teenager. That morning, after a quick breakfast in the cafeteria, she was to lead a seminar on creating relatable characters. Her speech to the entire conference was the day after tomorrow at the final gathering in the auditorium. One speech, 2 seminars, and a book table where she could sign copies of her popular series. Maybe she could even sell 1 or 2 of her older books, the not-so-popular ones. At 9:30, after toast and coffee, she was standing at the head of a small classroom with her hands in her pockets. The room capacity implied pessimistic expectations, but she was pleased to see the rows all full just a few minutes after the scheduled start. A few added chairs had to be borrowed from an undisclosed location. After introducing herself and confirming the name of the seminar, she began her presentation. This is how you create a relatable character. She gestured toward her outfit, her loose cotton blouse, her plain blue cardigan, and the baggy gray pants that could not be dignified by the label slacks. She used her casual public persona as an object lesson. On the other hand, she had not gone so far as to wear her riding costume, sweats or pajamas. That would have been too on the nose, as they say. After the room chuckled at her attempted humility regarding her relatable appearance, the ones laughing were I need to read that over. Half the room chuckled at her attempted humility regarding her relatable appearance. The ones laughing were her readers, her audience. The other half would have to tag along with those who already got her. Writing was like that. No matter how relatable her characters or how compelling her prose, some people would simply not get her. No one was universally loved or understood. That was part of the secret of relatable characters. She had seen other writers fail where they attempted to create characters everyone would love and understand. Those writers didn't realize that even their universal, generic heroes were not truly universal. Lots of people didn't get them either. Certainly, it was hard to love a heroine who was perfect. As if to demonstrate how less than perfect she was, Molly had to cut the seminar short. Mrs. McGregor, there's a call for you, an emergency. This time it was a young woman staffer who seemed to be apologizing with her eyes and her mousy voice. She was apologizing primarily to Molly, not to the seminar attendees, who were about to be shortchanged. Of course, Molly had a cell phone. Anyone whose emergency would require her attention could have called her cell, but she had powered it off in order to prevent interruptions or distractions. Clearly, her precautions had been inadequate. I'm so sorry, Molly apologized to the class. They were due another 10 minutes of Q&A and then some spontaneous greetings afterwards. A family member. She broke off, not willing to bring the aspiring writers into her whole story. She knew which family member this would be. Was that instinct? Divine revelation? Maybe just playing the percentages. Neither of her sons were likely to have a seminar-interrupting crisis. But her 85-year-old father? Molly called the elder care facility that was just 2 miles from her home and almost 20 miles from this West Suburban College campus. She didn't wait for the receptionist to finish her greeting. Hello, this is Molly McGregor. Is something wrong with my father? Mr. Deaver? Yes, Harold Deaver. She didn't like calling him Harry when talking with strangers. It seemed especially inappropriate in his current compromised state, a condition in which he was incapable of choosing his own intimacies. I'll connect you to his nurse. On a Wednesday, that nurse would normally be Carmen, but the emergency phone call probably meant Carmen had the day off. She would know better than to call the writers' conference, even though Molly had given her the phone number in case of emergency, dire emergency. Hello, Mrs. Deaver. The voice was unfamiliar. This is Molly McGregor, Harold's daughter. Oh, I'm so sorry. The youngish voice carried a Russian lilt. No worries. How is Dad? Well, right now he's calm. Did you give him something? Something? Drugs? No, that was not necessary. I got a call that there was an emergency. Molly decided not to pile on the details about being interrupted in the middle of a seminar for aspiring fiction writers. That would only add to the number and intensity of apologies, all of them mandatory and uninspiring. Yes, he was inconsolable. He was very sad that you had died. He was weeping and wailing that Molly had died. He's thinking of my mother. She died? Several years ago. Oh, I'm sorry. A simple, standalone apology. But what was this young stranger apologizing for? Instantly, Molly knew the young nurse, or medical assistant, had lost her mother recently. She just knew it supernaturally. And I'm sensing that you lost your mother recently as well. What? Yes. I know that makes it particularly difficult to deal with the grief of others. My father can be very dramatic these days. He didn't used to be like that. Molly was blabbering. She was trying to pad the fact that she had just learned something about this stranger without even trying. Her internal friends seemed to think it was relevant. She assumed he was right, but that didn't mean she embraced everything about his mode of revelation. I don't know what to say, the young woman stammered. I'll pray for your continued recovery, and thanks for taking care of my dad. They hung up after mutually awkward farewells. 2. Molly visited her dad the day after the conference ended, a Saturday. The speech went well, I think. They laughed. No one cried. She talked to him the way she used to, as if she could step into her past and find him as he once was, inquisitive, insightful, and deeply invested in his daughter's success. Those days were before Mom died 8 years ago. In a way, Molly did believe it was possible to reach him. Her dad had not been as religious as her mother, but after Mom died, he had begun to attend a Lutheran church near where he lived in Hoffman Estates, northwest of Chicago. I like the order of it all, the simplicity, the world that makes sense to those who allow it to. Those were his coherent words regarding the attending church at least 6 years ago. Molly suspected there was some part of him that wanted to have church on his own terms, not on her mother's terms, not her mother's church. Well, Mom, gone to glory, as she would have said, Dad was free to measure out his religious attachment, avoid some of Mom's enthusiasm in the process. He found the religion he needed at his Lutheran church. She also suspected his change of heart regarding church might have been one early symptom of the dementia that would wipe out his personality almost entirely. But she believed God could use the smallest opening to intervene in a life, and she believed God was in her dad, and God was in her. I never would have divorced her, no matter what. Dad answered Molly's summary of her writer's conference experience with that non sequitur. Divorce Mom? It was a silly question, but that didn't mean Molly shouldn't ask. No matter what. He shook his head dully. He was seated in his usual recliner, staring blankly at the TV. Her dad had been a reporter who worked his way up to the editorial desk at a newspaper in one of the larger Chicago suburbs. He had been sharp. Now, his dullness seemed like revenge exacted by his enemies. He was suffering at the hand of the enemy who steals, kills, and destroys. Because her father seemed to embrace faith in Jesus before dull confusion entangled his brain, Molly occasionally spoke to him as if he had God inside him. None of the promises about God dwelling in those who believe included a competency clause, as far as she knew. She remembered to address that image of God at her father's core when not blocked by her own weary discouragement. She was thinking about these things when Dad stopped muttering about a potential divorce and locked eyes with her. He rarely met her eyes these days. She assumed that was because he was uncomfortable with her identity, not certain whether he should know her. He sometimes spoke to her as if she were Mom, or as if she were Deb, her little sister. A pale young nurse interrupted the staring contest with Dad, a compelling connection broken as unexpectedly as it began. Mrs. Molly, I'm Katrina. We spoke on the phone. The Russian accent was familiar, but the girlish face and willowy limbs were not. Molly grinned at the nurse, but reconnected with her dad's eyes. He had adopted a rare, knowing look, a brightness that came from those old times before he lost his wife, and then lost his command of facts and reality. She returned to Katrina. Good to meet you. Are you coming to check whether I'm as crazy as I sounded on the phone? Katrina remained standing in the doorway, where she would be an obstacle to intruders, but not a very stout one. Her eyes were large, dark blue perhaps, her eyebrows raised. She had the look of a baby animal. Are you my mother? I was impressed with your insight. Insight is not crazy, but I still don't understand how you knew about me. You hadn't even talked to me before. Inhaling deeply, Molly glanced at Dad. He had never believed in her more fantastical religious experiences, not before dementia became his default interface with the world. These days, he nodded agreeably if she told him she had learned some news from the spirit inside her. She occasionally shared her revelations with her father as a way of testing them for herself, and she still harbored the hope that he was understanding her at some level. She wanted to believe that his core was intact and that, like her, his core was occupied by his true self and by his creator. The dementia was simply an interface problem, a fault in his motor skills, the motors that operated his mouth and his lens on the world. Molly smiled at the young nurse. I can't say I completely understand how I know things like that either, but my best explanation is that it comes from God. God talks to you? Yes, I believe so, and I believe God is so close to me that communicating is inevitable, unavoidable. Yes, I believe so. Close? Like not off in heaven somewhere? Katrina flicked the fingers of one hand toward the ceiling. For me, God is everywhere, but most importantly, I believe that Jesus is God and that Jesus lives inside me. I suppose that is the crazy part. Katrina's pale brows furrowed and her long lashes fluttered as if to blink away multiple motes of dust. Yes, but for me, the crazy part is that more Christians don't believe God is really inside us. Okay, I guess that is an unusual way to say it, but my mother, she talked to God all the time. She was like gossiping with God every day, chit-chat, you know. When did she pass away? Molly had taken Dad's hand at some point during this conversation, perhaps for security, hers and his both. My mother died last year. My father took it very hard. They were married for 40 years. I thought he was going to die, too. He has not been the same. Just watches TV all the time. She glanced quickly toward Dad's TV. No life. Nothing left in him. Katrina paused, and her lips pursed in one way and then the other. I suppose I wish he had wailed and howled like your father did the other day. It would be better than my father's sleepiness. Unconsciousness, really. I'm so sorry. Katrina inhaled deeply. Her rapid blinking stopped, and she settled her eyes on Molly. Tell me about this God inside you. 3. Molly held the tiny figure of a bearded Jesus in long robes between her thumb and forefinger. She had found it on the vanity counter in the church restroom. She presumed it was a tiny image of Jesus. Who did it belong to? Was it plastic or rubber? It couldn't possibly be a Jesus eraser, could it? Should she set it back down? She wanted to show someone. She returned it to the space between the twin sinks where anyone who came in would see it. She would share her find in that subtle way, and maybe the girl who had lost it would return to recover her tiny Jesus. Staggering out of the restroom, she wondered if she could use that real-life bathroom discovery in a novel. She couldn't see how it would go in the current book, maybe another one of her future books. She had written a 10-book series about church people, members of one particular congregation, but she was taking a break from that, maybe permanently. The tiny Jesus in the bathroom might have shown up in a book 11 of that series if she were going to write one. Current project was more serious, less quaint. Hello, Molly. Jake Hargraves loved to greet her that way, probably resisting the whole, well, hello, Molly, which would have pinned her name to an old song that would only be familiar to the handful of church people who were older than her. Jake wasn't older than her, but was looking older than when they had first met at church. His dark hair was receding, revealing more of his forehead, and he wore glasses most of the time now. Hey, Jake, I found Jesus in the bathroom. He was a good audience for this kind of testimony. Jake believed all kinds of things that were questionable to the world and to the church, including that Jesus could occasionally be found in a restroom. Really, in what form? He sounded almost serious as he pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. Perhaps he was reserving judgment. A tiny rubber toy, or plastic maybe, about 1 inch tall. She stepped aside so a woman could enter the restroom. Oh, only a little Jesus, I see. How long have you been seeing little people, Molly? Jake was a computer tech of some kind, and the oldest computer gamer Molly knew. She guessed his age at about 50. He walked with her into the cafe in the church basement. This was my first little person. Is it a common phenomenon? Actually, I think I had a similar experience. I saw a tiny figure of Jesus at the rental place when I got my car, when my car was in the shop last month. The guy working at the rental car desk had a cross around his neck and this little bearded man in a robe standing beneath the computer monitor. Did you ask him about it? Jake shook his head. We weren't alone. I didn't want to make trouble for him at his work. Well, it seems like he was making his own trouble. Yeah, you're right. I guess I just chickened out. Makes you wonder about the dynamics at that car rental place. Like, does that guy take his little Jesus with him if he's assigned to a different desk? You would think so. You wouldn't want Jesus to be left behind. They both laughed. Molly shook her head, knowing she couldn't top that joke. Jake was still snickering as he lifted a paper plate from the counter at the head of the snack line. He handed the plate to Molly, who was collecting plasticware. Is it confusing to give the children small toy images of Jesus? I'm thinking the whole asking him into your heart is complicated enough without that. He just shook his head. His smile stuck on his bearded face. The Burson family huddled into the line behind Molly and Jake. They exchanged greetings, though the younger children were silently focused on the snacks. One little person was riding on her tall dad's arms, and two were furtively testing how close they could come to touching the food on the platters and trays that were so near their noses. The eldest, Brant, looked down his nose and kept his shoulders back, straight. Molly turned to Jake and spoke in a lower tone. Maybe they've given up on teaching the kiddos that Jesus should be invited into their hearts. Carried in their pockets is the new child evangelism strategy. Rolling his eyes until he stuck in the ceiling-ward position, Jake shook his head and winced. I don't think that's going to happen here. Did they tell you when you were a kid that you had to ask Jesus into your heart? I was a juvenile delinquent. They just told me I would end up in prison. Molly scowled at him and used tongs to pinch a few wheat crackers to go with the hummus dip she saw down the line. She assumed Jake was embellishing his wayward youth, but couldn't tell for sure. She shuffled toward the hummus and its roasted red pepper vibes. I was told that Jesus wandered into my heart, but I don't remember anyone explaining how that really worked. I mean, how could some guy from the Bible get into my heart? Sticking him in my pocket would have made more sense back then. And now, Jake popped the donut hole into his mouth. Suppose I'm obsessed about it because of my book. The asking Jesus into your heart thing isn't actually in the Bible, but it's way better than Jesus in your pocket or Jesus on the bathroom counter. Brant, the blonde boy close behind Molly, seemed to cock his head at this last statement. He was a smart kid. Maybe he had the same questions regarding Jesus inside him, if not Jesus in the restroom. In that microsecond of recognition, Molly felt as if she and Brant were connected by something. Bits of melon, a few grapes, and a strawberry finished her snack collection. She and Jake separated after the buffet, each drawn into a different conversation. Molly saw Brant glancing at her once more before reassembling with his family. Perhaps he was wondering what that old lady meant with her irreverent question about Jesus in her heart, or maybe he was just thinking she was strange. She wasn't inclined to argue about that conclusion. That's the first 3 chapters, first 13 pages of Dwell and Rest, available now at Amazon. Thanks for listening.